Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Vijeta, and today we shall be continuing with our Shakespeare. So, as I was discussing about Shakespeare's personal life and various praises by many of his contemporaries, I was also talking about the first folio by Ben Jonson, wherein he wrote something very I won't say flattering, but in the case of Shakespeare, nothing can be flattering because of his works. Although there's always criticism. So, without much further ado, let us begin. So, in the preface to First Folio by Ben Jonson, he says, "This figure that thou here seest put, it was for gentle Shakespeare cut, wherein the crowd had a strife with nature to outdo the life. Oh, could he but have drawn his wit as well in brass as he hath hit his face, the print would then surpass all that was ever written brass. But since he cannot, reader look not on his picture but his book." So yeah, it's kind of written in an old English, archaic English style. So a lot of spellings are different. Although one can understand what Ben Jonson means by such praises and by such words, that Shakespeare has surpassed a lot of poetic and prose dimensions in his works. The multidimensionality of his characters kind of gives a new overview to the viewers or the readers who are consuming his content. And he opened the way for a lot of works that in even in the modernist and postmodern era where we talk about positivism or positivism basically means you have one overview or one objective reality, but post-positivism says that you can have multiple objective realities. And in Shakespeare's works you can see that post-positivism thing coming out in various characters because of the multi-dimensionality of various characters. And I think other critics and scholars realize that as well. Shakespeare was probably educated at the King's New School in Stratford because not much is known about his early life. Much of it is speculation. At the age of 18, Shakespeare married a 26-year-old Anne Hathaway in 1582. A lot of people say that Anne was pregnant. Nicholas Rowe, Shakespeare's first biographer, recounted a Stratford legend that Shakespeare fled the town for London to escape prosecution for deer poaching in the estate of local squire Thomas Lucy. He was attacked in print by the playwright Robert Greene in his Wordsworth of Wit. The second folio is the 1632 edition of the collected plays of Shakespeare. It follows the first folio of 1623. Much language was updated in the second folio, and there are almost 1700 changes. False folio is the term that Shakespeare scholars and bibliographers have applied to William Jaggart's printing of 10 Shakespearean and pseudo Shakespearean plays together in 1619, the first attempt to collect Shakespeare's work in a single volume. 19 of Shakespeare's first plays first appeared in quarto before the publication of the first folio in 1623, 18 of those before his death in 1616. One play co authored with John Fletcher, The Two Noble Kinsmen, was first published in 1634, and one play first published in the first folio, The Taming of the Shrew, was later published in quarto. William Shakespeare died on 23rd April 1616, and it was also the quite curiously, it is also the date of his birth, although the date of his birth is not known precisely. So yeah, and to honor this, UNESCO established 23rd April as the International Day of the Book. Now we come to criticism on Shakespeare. Ben Jonson said that he redeemed his vices with his virtues. There was even more in him to be praised than to be pardoned. He was not of an age, but for all time. John Milton said in his sonnet on Shakespeare in 1630, "What needs my Shakespeare for his honoured bones? The labour of an age in piled stones, or what his hallowed relics should be hid." In another line he said, Dear son of memory, great heir of fame, what needst thou, such weak witness of thy name? This sonnet of Milton appeared in the second folio of plays by Shakespeare in 1632 as an epitaph on the admirable dramatic poet W. Shakespeare. Samuel Pepys, in 1662, in his diary on 29 September, he wrote, "To the King's Theatre, where we saw Midsummer Night's Dream, which I had never seen before, nor shall ever again, for it is the most insipid, ridiculous play that ever I saw in my life." So it was kind of a criticism, harsh in some ways. Lord Granville deciphered the diary of Pepys in 1825, and John Dryden in 1668 said about Shakespeare in his essay of dramatic poesy that to begin then with Shakespeare, he was the man who, of all modern and perhaps ancient poets, had the largest and most comprehensive soul. So, yeah, Dryden kind of touched the nerve of the multidimensionality of which I was talking about earlier. He could understand what Shakespeare was about. Thomas Rhymer in 1692 attacked Othello by saying that the moral shore of this fable, Othello, is very instructive. Joseph Edison in 1712 said, "Among the English, Shakespeare has incomparably excelled all others." Alexander Pope in 1725 wrote about Shakespeare in his preface to Pope's edition of Shakespeare. And he said that his characters are so much nature herself that it is a sort of injury to call them by so distant a name as copies of her. So, actually, Pope could also understand that Shakespeare was kind of, touching the horizon. He was going beyond. He was transcendental, and that is quite interesting because in Pope's work also have a lot of variety. So I think maybe that is why he was able to understand. And I think a lot of later scholars were able to grasp Shakespeare more, although that's not entirely true, but the later poets could get more perspectives in his works, and which is the reason why they could appreciate Shakespeare more. And then, yeah, Samuel Johnson in 1765 wrote about Shakespeare in the plays of William Shakespeare. And he said that Shakespeare's adherence to general nature has exposed him to the censure of critics who form their judgments upon narrower principles. Here, Johnson is also saying that, you know, people who can't understand Shakespeare don't have a wide horizon of thought processes or perspectives. I don't know. But yeah, see, in order to read Shakespeare and understand Shakespeare, one needs to have a more of a flexible and a more of a broad-minded sense of the world or human nature. You can't be black and white and read Shakespeare. You have to give space to nuance and the gray areas of life, and then you can understand and probably enjoy Shakespeare more. And in the same work he wrote, "The work of a correct and regular writer is a garden accurately formed and diligently planted, varied with shades and scented with flowers. The composition of Shakespeare is a forest." And see that it's beautiful the way Johnson describes Shakespeare's works as a forest containing all the kinds of flowers and roots, and it's quite beautiful. Johnson also said about him as Shakespeare opens a mine which contains gold and diamonds in inexhaustible plenty, though clouded by incrustations, debased by impurities, and mingled with a mass of meaner minerals. And that also kind of adheres to the thing, to the forethought that Shakespeare's works are nature itself, because nature is also not a pure thing. It is also a diluted mixture of a lot of impurities, a lot of riffraff, if I may say so. And Shakespeare's works have a lot of ridges and a lot of uh, curves. It's not all a straight line, but that is what makes Shakespeare's works so, how can I say, beautiful, so rugged, so raw, so real, And this is why Shakespeare is so relevant, I think. And a lot of his works have modern adaptations, even in different cultures. Not only in medieval England, but it has a place in modern day cinema. In India, there are so many Shakespeare adaptations, and even in other cultures, and shows what Shakespeare's works have like the quality that they have. And Johnson also said that Shakespeare writes without moral purpose and is more careful to please than to instruct. So, yeah, that can be taken as a criticism or a praise, whichever way you like. Even Johann Wolfgang Goethe in 1795-96 said that there is no pleasure greater and purer than with eyes closed accompany a Shakespeare's play, not declaimed but recited by a safe and natural voice. And he wrote about Shakespeare in his Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship. He wrote about Hamlet. Prince Hamlet is suddenly facing the need for a great action imposed upon your soul that is unable to do it. So, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, he actually inspired a lot of writers. He was a German philosopher, and it's quite interesting to see that so many people from other cultures, even in those times, were inspired by and knew about Shakespeare's works and speculated about it. He also said that perhaps no one has made so great as the first major link of wish and duty in the individual character as Shakespeare did. Mercado de Esses in 1896 said, "One day when there is no more Great Britain, when there is no more United States, when there is no more the English language, will exist will exist Shakespeare, not exit. Will exist Shakespeare. We will speak Shakespeare." So yeah, that is quite a far-fetched, but a very interesting praise of Shakespeare, and it kind of touches on the emotion that Shakespeare evokes through his works. Charles Lamb in 1811's in his work on the tragedies of Shakespeare wrote, "We talk of Shakespeare's admirable observation of life when we should feel that not from a petty inquisition into those cheap and everyday characters." Thomas De Quincey in 1823 in his work on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, he wrote, "O mighty poet, thy works are not as those of other men, simply and merely great works of art, but are also like the phenomena of nature." Again, Thomas De Quincey is also comparing Shakespeare to nature, his works to nature, and that shows the impact Shakespeare had. Thomas Carlyle in 1841, in his work on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history, wrote, "Nay, apart from spiritualities and considering him merely as a real, marketable, tangibly useful possession, this King Shakespeare, does not he shine in crowned sovereignty over us all as the noblest, gentlest, yet strongest of rallying signs, indestructible, really more valuable in that point of view than any other means or appliance whatsoever? Yes, this Shakespeare is ours. We produced him. We speak and think by him. We are we are of one blood and kind with him." So, in a way, Thomas Carlyle is proud to be having this. He's proud to be a human being because Shakespeare was also a human being. So, that kind of kinship is what he's proud of, because he said that Shakespeare is so great that, that to share this kind of human kinship with Shakespeare is enough. So, yeah, that is something. And even Victor Hugo in 1859 said that it is a long silence before the sun's answer. I'll translate Shakespeare. Shakespeare, the ocean. So Hugo also compares, in a way, Shakespeare to nature, to the ocean. Leo Tolstoy, even Russian scholars were proud and awed by Shakespeare. In his work, Tolstoy on Shakespeare said, "I remember the astonishment I felt when I first read Shakespeare. I expected to receive a powerful aesthetic pleasure, but having read one after the other works regarded as his best, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Macbeth, not only did I feel no delight, but I felt an irresistible repulsion and tedium." So yeah, not all of the scholars and poets and writers were inspired or impressed by Shakespeare, which is fine as well. And it shows that you can have differing opinions, and voicing those opinions do not make you less of a writer or less of a individual. And that is quite brave of these writers to put forth their ideas and their perspectives. It shows, kind of shows you to look at Shakespeare in a different light, and to understand Shakespeare in a different mode, and it kind of makes you think, and that is what matters at the end of the day. D.H. Lawrence in 1923 wrote about Shakespeare in his When I Read Shakespeare in the Complete Poems of D.H. Lawrence. Sigmund Freud, in 1930, in his Moses and Monotheism, wrote, "Incidentally, in this meantime, I stopped to believe that the author of Shakespeare's works was the man of Stratford." Yeah, so Freud was like, this man, yeah, I mean, some of them did not believe that a countryside boy with not much of a formal education could write and think so much out of the tried beyond the horizon, think out of the blue, and have so many perspectives. So that is something. Even Sigmund Freud and W.H. Auden in 1947, in his lectures on Shakespeare, said, "I find Shakespeare particularly appealing in his attitude towards his poem." And he also said that Shakespeare never takes himself too seriously, which is quite interesting. T.S. Eliot said that Dante and Shakespeare divided the water between them. There is no thought. In his Hamlet and his Problems, in the Sacred Foot, essay on poetry and criticism, he wrote, "We must simply admit that here Shakespeare tackled a problem which proved too much for him." So he was critical of Shakespeare as well. He praised him where he thought he was praiseworthy, but he did not scruple to he had no scruples to criticize him as well. And he also said that we should have to understand things which Shakespeare did not understand himself. Kenneth Burke of Shakespeare said that Shakespeare found many ingenious ways to make it seem that his greatest plays unfolded of themselves, like a destiny rather than by a technical expert's scheming. So Burke has a very interesting way of framing his criticism. He says that, Shakespeare's works are like destiny, they just unfold themselves. That is, they take you by surprise, and it's quite interesting. Like an origami paper, it just unfolds to so miraculously to reveal what it is, and it's quite interesting to see so many criticisms on Shakespeare and praises of Shakespeare, and so much so that it has become a genre of its own. So it's quite interesting. Just like movie reviewing, it became a study on its own with time. Harold Bloom in 1994 from the Western Canon said that Shakespeare is the canon. He sets the standard and the limits of literature. So now we come to plays of Shakespeare. The first play that I will talk about is Henry VI, Part 2, written in 1591. The main characters are Henry VI, King, Margaret, wife of Henry VI, Anjou and Maine, two territories of France which they exchanged for Margaret, Gloucester, uncle of Henry VI, Jack Cade, comes in England to ruin it, and he comes from Ireland. England and Ireland also have a history. So the plot is that the date of the play's writing is uncertain, and some say it was written before Part One, probably in 1591, which is the reason why I'm discussing it before Part One. Suffolk presents Margaret as King's new wife, and also brings peace treaty. In the treaty, the French had asked the territories of Anjou and Maine in return for Margaret. Earl of Gloucester reproaches Henry for his selfishness. York reproaches Henry for his selfishness as well. Gloucester and his wife, the Duchess, talk about their dream. The Duchess sees a dream of becoming the queen. Hume and the Duchess desire to hire a witch to know about the future of Henry. The witch then conjures. Bolingbroke tells ambiguously about Henry's future, and the Dutch was arrested doing so. At the end, Richard fights with Somerset and kills him, as well as Clifford. York declares victory, but Henry, along with Margaret, flees to London. Jack Cade rebellion takes place in this play. It took place in 1450, very important, and it's CADE. The famous quotes of the play are: rumor is a pipe, blown by surmises, jealousies, conjectures, and of so easy and so plain a stop, that the blunt monster with uncounted heads, the still discordant, wavering multitude, can you play upon it? And then virtue is choked with foul ambition. Delays have dangerous ends. Quite raw and rugged quotes, very suitable to the play as well. A play which has so much intrigue and so many plots and jealousies. So, yeah. Now we come to Henry VI, Part 3, 1592. In the third part, which is written in 5 acts, York enters the throne with his sons and followers. Henry enters the throne and wants a fight there itself. Henry asks York to let him rule till he is alive, and upon his death, he will let the throne to York. York agrees and departs. Margaret accuses her husband for being an unnatural father who disinherited their son. While in the town of York, Edward, Richard's son, and his followers, Montague, urge York to take the throne immediately rather than waiting for Henry's death. To avenge York, Margaret attacks York and captures him and asks him to wipe his tears with handkerchief dipped in his other son Rutland's blood. Quite, quite a play indeed. Richard accuses her and he is stabbed to death by Margaret. Now, the other living York brothers, Edward and Richard, see a vision of the three sons and believe it as the three York brothers. Henry is asked to undo his decision by Margaret and Clifford, but he denies. Richard hunts Clifford in order to take revenge for his father and brother. Henry's son, Prince Edward, urges him to flee. Clifford is dead, and Henry is nowhere to bound York. So they reach London to fetch the throne and crown Richard and George. Henry is captured by the men of Edward. Edward asks for the hand of the King of France's sister, while Margaret asks for the troops' aid against Edward. Edward plans to marry Lady Grey, while his brother Richard was compelled by his physical disabilities to support him. French King Louis wanted his sister's hand to be given to Edward, but when he hears of his marriage, he is enraged and gives the troops to Margaret to fight against Edward. Warwick of York changes his side and meets with Margaret. George is also upset by his brother's immediate marriage, so he also meets Warwick and Margaret. In the next battle, Edward is captured. Edward gives up the throne, looking at his brother on the enemy's side. Henry VI is freed by Warwick and George. Now, Henry becomes king for namesake only, while George and Warwick become the land protector. Edward again returns with reinforcement. He only wanted to be the Duke, while his followers wanted him to fetch the crown. Again, Edward and Richard capture Henry and send him to the Tower. Richard convinces George to change the side, and they all together attack on Warwick and kill him. Warwick's supporters join with Margaret and they attack Edward, and they attach themselves to Edward. Sorry, what am I saying? And they attack Edward, and Edward wins. Edward sends Somerset and Oxford, who are the followers of Warwick, away and kill Prince Edward and imprison Margaret. Richard kills Henry, and his next goal was to eliminate Edward and George. At the end, Edward's son is born, and there was no one to oppose him except his own brothers. So, yeah, I think I will stop here for now. 2 plays are enough. 2 plays and some criticisms of Shakespeare. That's more than enough for this lecture. We shall continue in the next class. If you liked my video, please give it a like. Subscribe to my channel, and any feedback or corrections are welcome in the comment box. Thank you for your patience. I will meet you all in the next video. Thank you.